February 13th, 2000, Shelby, North Carolina. The Degree family went to church and then returned home, putting the two children, Asha and O'Brien, to bed at 8 p.m. Their father, Harold, checked on his children after the power in their neighborhood went out and then came back on after a car crash. They were both in their beds, fast asleep. Before going to bed at 2:30 a.m. on February 14th, he checked on them a second time. They were both still sleeping soundly. Shortly after Harold checked on his kids, O'Brien remembers hearing his sister's bed creak as she shifted. At the time, he had just assumed that she was rolling over to get more comfortable. In reality, Asha had gotten out of bed and took a book bag with her as she left the room. The bag had already been packed with clothes and some personal items. Asha, a 9-year-old girl at the time, proceeded to leave the house by herself. Sometime between 3:45 and 4:15 in the morning, a trucker and a motorist both saw Asha walking south along Highway 18. After they saw a report on the news about Asha's disappearance, they reported what they saw to the police. In this report, the motorist stated that he turned his car around and circled the area multiple times after seeing Asha because he thought it was strange for a little girl to be walking along the highway in the early hours of the morning completely alone. At some point during this motorist's circling, Asha ran into the woods at the side of the highway. This report only came after Asha's mother went into her bedroom to wake her and O'Brien for school and discovered that her daughter was missing. When she couldn't find Asha anywhere in the house or in her mother-in-law's house across the street, she called the police. The police arrived at the Degree house by 6:40 a.m. and the canine unit they brought could not pick up Asha's scent. Friends, family, and neighbors joined the search effort but could find nothing. On February 15th, a shed at a business near where Asha had been seen was found to have candy wrappers, a pencil, a marker, and a Mickey Mouse hair bow that belonged to her. The one other object in the shed was a photograph of a girl around Asha's age who has still never been identified to this day. About a week later, after 9,000 man-hours had been invested in the search, it was called off. Eventually, the FBI and North Carolina's State Bureau of Investigation got involved in a long-range search for leads in regards to Asha's case. The investigators have stated that, based on what she took with her, they believe she had been planning her departure for several days prior to her disappearance. However, she is also not the typical runaway. Most runaways are at least 12 years old and have some kind of issue or struggle that they want to get away from. Asha had a supportive family, wasn't struggling academically, and had no obvious reason to leave home. Despite this, the most likely explanation is that she was running away but got off track or abducted in the process. On August 3, 2001, Asha's book bag was discovered by construction workers during a project off Highway 18, roughly 26 miles from her hometown of Shelby. It was wrapped in a plastic bag and contained Asha's name and home phone number. The bag also contained a Dr. Seuss book and a t-shirt with the band New Kids on the Block on it, neither of which she had owned prior to her disappearance. The book was actually from her elementary school library. The FBI took custody of the book bag for forensic testing, but the results of those tests have never been shared with the public. Over the years, the Degree family has done what they can to keep Asha's memory alive. They have appeared on television programs and interviews and have even hosted an annual walk to raise awareness and money to fuel the search for Asha. In May of 2016, it seemed as if these efforts may have finally paid off. The FBI announced that they had found a potential new lead. Asha may have been seen entering a dark green Lincoln Continental Mark IV from the early 70s, or possibly a Ford Thunderbird from the same time period, along Route 18 where she had last been seen the morning of her disappearance. The car was also described as having rust around the wheel wells. However, this lead does not seem to have produced any more answers about Asha's case. To this day, she is still missing, and it is unknown if she is alive or dead. Investigators have stated before that a 9-year-old girl would almost certainly not have been able to remain missing for over 20 years on her own. She almost undoubtedly either had help or someone who was responsible for making her disappear. It's a chilling thought that someone out there has had a hand in keeping Asha hidden from the authorities. Hopefully, since this case has never been labeled as cold, the Degree family will get some answers soon. Barbara Bullock was 55 years old when her husband's cousin visited them in Montana in 2007. He brought his friend, Jim, along with him on the trip. On July 18th, Barbara was supposed to take the visitors on a hike in the Bitterroot Mountains. Her husband had a heart attack well before this trip took place, so he did not join them on the hike. Her husband's cousin was apparently hungover that day, so he also did not join them. Barbara and Jim departed for the Bitterroot Mountains, and, unbeknownst to Barbara's husband, he would never see his wife again. At around noon, Jim stopped to take in a scenic view while Barbara continued walking. Jim reportedly only spent about a minute looking at the view, but when he turned back to continue the hike with Barbara, she was nowhere to be seen. Neither Barbara herself or any of her belongings have ever been found. According to the information we have on Barbara, she was an experienced hiker who was very familiar with the area. She was carrying a black day pack with a handgun in it at the time of her disappearance. Her husband told the authorities that she was afraid of heights and would therefore not have gone anywhere near a precipice or cliff, making an accident less likely. During the investigation, the police discovered that Barbara and Jim had spoken to two young men on the trail. Other witnesses confirmed that they had seen two young men on the trails that day. Apparently, these men were in their early 20s and had a black mixed-breed dog with floppy ears and white markings. One of the men had dark skin and black hair, while the other had a medium complexion and reddish hair. They may have been driving a light-colored old Chevy S10 SUV with Montana license plates. Unfortunately, these men have never been identified or located. There have been several theories about what happened to Barbara over the years. The first theory is that Jim made some kind of advance on Barbara during the hike, which resulted in a struggle and her eventual death. There has never been any evidence found to support this theory. A second theory proposes that the hike was a cover-up to dispose of Barbara. Maybe her husband wanted her dead for some unknown reason and had his cousin bring someone who would be willing to take care of it for him. Again, this theory has no substantial evidence. The next theory is that Barbara was murdered randomly by a stranger. This theory tends to make people think of the young men who had been on the trail that day, but this theory, much like the first two, has never been substantiated. The remaining theories are all even less likely than the first three. It does not seem as if Barbara intentionally disappeared of her own volition, because her bank accounts and possessions have never been touched since that day. An animal attack is also unlikely, seeing as how the authorities have never located a body or any sign of a struggle whatsoever. This also makes a simple misadventure or hiking accident unlikely. What do you think happened that fateful day? Was Jim responsible for Barbara's death and somehow covered it up so thoroughly that nothing was ever found? Was it truly a freak accident that has somehow never been discovered to this day? Unfortunately, we may never know the true answer for certain. This last case is much more recent than the other two. Joshua Guerrier was reported missing on June 1, 2023. The 28-year-old had gone hiking near the Duckabush River in Washington. He was reported missing after a different group of hikers found a pile of his clothes, his cell phone, and his tethered dog alongside the river. Searches have been conducted with helicopters, drones, and by foot, but nothing more has been found so far. A friend of Joshua's conducted an independent search of her own on June 2nd, but she ended up needing to be rescued after she sustained injuries from having attempted to cross the river. The current overwhelmed her and resulted in her rescue. The searchers have stated that they believe Joshua most likely tried to cross the river and was swept away by the current, which is apparently very strong at this time of year. The Duckabush River has been the site of search and rescue operations in the past, so it would certainly not be out of the question for this to be what happened. Hopefully, the searchers will find Joshua alive and be able to rescue him and provide medical attention. Let this serve as a reminder to always be mindful of your surroundings and never take unnecessary risks.